It's all about truth. All of it. Every single thing. All boils down to the truth. We all want truth. The truth will set you free. All right, welcome to the program, ladies and gentlemen. This is Press for Truth Live. I am your host, Dan Dix. Today is Tuesday, April the 12th, 2016, and we have a really groundbreaking show lined up for you today, guys. We're going to be joined on the line by the Honorable Paul Hellyer. Mr. Hellyer is the former Minister of National Defense, and he has now taken it upon himself to take on the banks. That's right, folks. He's going to be taking on the Bank of Canada. Some of viewers here at Press for Truth, I'm sure, are familiar with Comer and the Committee on Monetary and Economic Reform. And when they launched, along with William Krem and Ann Emmett and their lawyer Rocco Galati, who launched this lawsuit against the banks, and it's kind of been going through appeal after appeal, and it's somewhat dead in the water. It's been taking years since we've been tracking this one, and that's where Mr. Hellyer comes into the picture, and he's going to take up that torch and carry on this fight against the bank. So I want to go ahead and pull him up. We'll get our guest on the line, and I just want to go ahead and get right into it. I know your time is busy, sir. So first of all, thank you so much for joining us here on Press for Truth Live.
Not at all. It's my pleasure.
So I want to get into the plan that you have laid out to introduce Canadian banking reform. But first of all, let's start out with a little bit of the basics. A couple of years ago, Paul, me and my friend Brian made a video in downtown Toronto where we went around on the streets of Toronto offering people $5 cash they can win if they can answer two very simple questions that Canadians really should know the answers to. And to our amazement, next to almost nobody knew the answers to these questions that one would think anybody should know the answers to. So let's start with the basics, and I'll ask you the same question that the general average Canadian on the street could not answer. And those questions were simply, what is money, and how is new money created?
Well, the answer is very simple. As of today, about 1% or less of our money consists of coins, 2 to 3% consists of bills, and the other 97% approximately consists of bank deposits. And that's not real money, though. It's just a virtual money created from touching a computer. They're computer entries. That's all it is. And the way it's created is so simple and also so misleading. If you want to borrow $35,000 to buy a new car, for example, you go and see your banker and ask for a loan, and they say, "Well, what collateral have you got?" And they'll ask for bonds or stocks or a mortgage on your house, or failing that, the signature of a rich friend or relative. And once you give them the collateral, they'll ask you to sign a note for $35,000. It's a demand note, actually, which can be called anytime. You sign the note at a rate of interest of prime plus 2 or 3%. I always say, depending on the color of your eyes or how the manager's feeling that morning, but that's a little a bias on my part. But and as soon as you sign the note, they go over and punch their computer, and presto, $35,000 appears in your account that you can go out and use to buy the car. Now, seconds earlier, that money, quote unquote, did not exist. It was created out of thin air, so to speak. And this is probably it's one giant Ponzi scheme. It's a global fraud. That's what it is. because the banks only need 5 cents in real money, capital, to create a dollar. So if you're taking out a mortgage for 100,000, for example, they only need 5,000 in capital to create a mortgage for you for 100,000, but you have to repay the 100,000. So they only have what I call blood, sweat, and tears money, 5,000, and you have to repay blood, sweat, and tears money of 100,000 plus interest. So that's the way the system works, and it's a gigantic fraud. It's really grand larceny, and they've been getting away with it for a long time now, and it's time that we did something about it.
It almost seems like a classic sort of bait and switch, where it's almost like throwing that fishing lure out, offering, the low interest payments. And then once you put down the real collateral, things that are actually tangible, physical things like your home, actual physical wealth, things that are actually worth something, then they have this ability to actually take that away from you and reel that fishing line in then once they've hook, line, and sinked you. So, is that kind of what it amounts to?
That only occurs if you can't pay your mortgage.
Right.
If they increase interest rates, as they have done before, you may recall in 1981-82 that interest rates went up to 22% in Canada. And it might interest you to know, I used to be in the housing business, and the prices had gone up a little bit since they were built in the 50s. And during that recession, there were people who paid more interest, and I said interest, on their mortgage than the original price of the house. Yeah,
well, that's what we need to figure out, is how did we get to the point where pre-1974 to post-1974 of paying interest on loans that are being borrowed from private banks that are essentially amount to offshore. Now, we're going to get into how we break that down, but before we do, right now, we have the Liberal budget is out right now. We need some real-world examples of what are some of the problems that we're seeing here. And I know this budget just came out not too long ago. I know a lot of Canadians are recognizing some issues with it. First of all, people noticed there doesn't seem to be anything in there with anything to do with cannabis legalization, even though Justin Trudeau campaigned on that. But they're not noticing the things that are going to deal with the economy, some of the things that are going to affect them very, very directly. So what have you noticed are some of the issues with the new Liberal budget?
Well, there are several issues. The first one, I guess, to object to is that they're borrowing a lot of money to increase their expenditures, and they're borrowing it in the market. And so they're going to increase the federal debt by about $100 billion over 4 years. That's on top of the $615 billion now. And then we'll have to pay interest on that in effect forever. And the other thing is they're not creating enough money. They're not spending enough money to get the economy up and running. The only plan, they said they were going to create 100,000 jobs. The head of the Parliamentary Budget Bureau said that was overrated, that it would be about 60,000 jobs. And what we need today is about 600,000 jobs over the course of the next couple of years or so. So there's not enough stimulus to do the job of getting the country really up and rolling the way it should be, and certainly not enough to reduce unemployment to what I would call a moral level, which is probably about half what it is now, or something of that nature. And they're going to do it on borrowed money instead of getting it from the Bank of Canada, which they have the right to do because we, the people, own the Bank of Canada 100%. It is our bank, and we can use it if we want to, and we did for 35 years. It just happened to be the best 35 years of the 20th century. I remember this is what we call in our campaign now the Canadian precedent. In 1938, there were no jobs in Canada, none. Then along comes the war, and pretty soon everybody's working either in the armed forces, the Army, Navy, or Air Force, or building factories or building munitions. Would you believe we actually hit an historic low of 1% unemployment? We certainly wouldn't want to aim that low today, but that just shows the change from 1938 to the early 40s. And the way you may say, well, where did the government get the money to do that? And the answer is that the Bank of Canada printed it, printed, and then made it available to the government of Canada at near zero cost. And I don't think it's necessary to go into the mechanics at the moment of how it worked, but the governor of the Bank of Canada, who was the first governor, Graham Towers, and in my opinion, the brightest, just worked on the principle that he would finance, and these were his own words actually in front of a parliamentary committee, he would provide the financing to match the potential of men and materials. In other words, he would see that the economy operated at full speed and none of this austerity stuff. And we did this to get out of the Depression and through World War II, which we did very, very well in the sense of building up an industrial economy. We're about the fourth in contributions to the war, and we emerged from that with a diversified economy, which was really a joy to behold. And and then after the war, of course, we used this what we call government-created money from the Bank of Canada to help build the Trans-Canada Highway and the St. Lawrence Seaway and the new airport terminals and a lot of other infrastructure, both provincial and in some cases municipal. And all of that in addition to launching our new and really first-class system for keeping people out of harm in the event of another recession or depression. In other words, a social security system that was a net to catch people from falling too hard and landing on the ground and hurting or killing themselves. So that worked until 1974. In effect, what we were doing there was sharing the money creation function between the government of Canada and the private banks. And the system worked perfectly. Well, then in 1974, everything changed. The governor of the bank was Gerald Bowie, and he made a speech out west saying that they were going to adopt monetarism. And what he didn't say was that he was going to join the Old Boys Club, the Bank for International Settlements in Switzerland, and really take his orders from them and from the International Monetary Cartel and from in effect, from the richest, most powerful people in the world. And a couple of things they did, they said no more lending money to governments at low cost. In other words, what we've been doing for our own benefit for 35 years, they said, no more. And so we had to start borrowing in the market. We paid market rates through those terrible recessions that the central banks of the world created in 81, 82, and again in 70, 71. And we, of course, had deficits. They were rolled over into debt, and we had to pay the interest on the debt. And would you believe that from 1974 until 2014-15, we, the people of Canada, paid $1.1 trillion in interest on that debt. And in my opinion, virtually none of it was necessary. So we got in a position where we became slaves of the International Monetary Cartel, and we've been running deficits since then often, and austerity budgets. We never had enough money for healthcare, education, infrastructure, for First Nations needs. All of these things were underfunded for 42 years, from 1974 until now, because the Bank of Canada joined the Old Boys Club, which in my latest book, The Money Mafia, A World in Crisis, I call the Money Mafia. They're the guys at the top, and they're nearly all guys, incidentally, but they're the guys at the top who are running the world and calling the shots and really ripping us off mightily. to the tune of imagine a trillion, 1.1 trillion, which I think one of my friends worked out was something over $17,000 for every man, woman, and child in Canada.
Unbelievable how much we've been robbed, the extent of the interest being paid since 1974, all the way up until, as you said, just up until this year. So essentially, obviously, something needs to be done. This can't continue to go the way it is going. So you are now introducing this Canadian bankers reform, bank reformers. So tell us a little bit about what the plan is and how you would like to see this go. How does it compare to what Comer was trying to doing? And yeah, what exactly is the plan for the banks?
What Comer is doing, incidentally, is trying to establish the principle. And what we're trying to do is to get the principle in operation immediately for the benefit of the Canadian people. And we're promoting a plan that we call a new social contract between the government and people of Canada that was originally presented to Parliament in 2013 by 40 of my colleagues and myself. And it is it's a very powerful plan to do two things. One, to create enough money to basically put back into the system over 7 years that $1.1 trillion that was taken out. So it's to recover and to have enough money to do all of the things that we've shortchanged during that period of time. And we're saying that the Bank of Canada, we should print some shares in Canada rather than bonds and give them those shares as collateral, and that they should print for us $150 billion a year for 7 years, and that the federal government should split that 50-50 with the provinces and the territories on a per capita basis, which would give them money to start right away with the infrastructure deficit that they've had for these last years. That, you know, in Toronto, dear old Toronto, for example, we still got a lot of those iron water pipes that break every winter, and they should all be replaced, and their bridges to be replaced, and all sorts of things that should be done, including new public transportation systems. And we need more money for the First Nations, and we need more money for the educational system, and more money for the medical system. And all of these things, it would allow them the freedom to go ahead and do nearly all of the things that we've been talking about, but not doing because we didn't have the money to do it. Mm-hmm. And of course, after 7 years, then we would just take a smaller share of the new money, and the governments would take 34% and the banks 66%. And that would allow both the banking system to continue to serve the people properly, and at the same time give governments at all levels, federal, provincial, and municipal, enough cash flow that they can meet our real needs in all of these areas that I've talked about, and many, many more, including the arts and all sorts of things. They can meet those needs with lower tax rates than we have today, considerably, and probably after having paid off significant amounts of debt during the 7 years, which would mean, again, a little more tax freedom to cut the taxes a little bit. And I estimate that at the federal level, with what we're proposing, they could perhaps reduce the federal debt by as much as 30% over a period of 7 years.
Well, what I'm wondering, Paul, is what would the checks and balances be in order to prevent another banker takeover? Because essentially, what's going to stop government bureaucrats from being or becoming just as corrupt as the banks?
Well, first of all, we're not talking. We're going to take the power away from the bureaucrats who got us into this mess. They're responsible for the situation in which we find ourselves today. And that's one of the reasons that we have to do it in Canada, is because we have, first of all, we did it before and it worked. It was not inflationary because you get this bugaboo from all the people saying, oh, government created money is inflationary. Well, that is just not true. And when we get our website up, people will be able to go there and see all of the arguments, pro and con, and they can come to their own conclusions. But
That'd be
money
great to
is
see.
money.
I think there's a lot of confusion about that one, and I'd really like to see that one because it's hard to understand how creating, even with what is being proposed, is still creating money out of nothing, essentially. Isn't it? Am I right? We're still creating money essentially from nothing.
This money that we would be creating,
Right.
all of it would have to be kept by the banks as cash reserves. As of today, as I mentioned or hinted, when they have no cash reserves at all.
Mm-hmm.
You're lucky if your bank has a cent or 2 cents
Right.
in real money, in cash, for every dollar you think you have in the bank. And part of this deal is that every year the bank reserves would have to go up by 5% until they reach 34% over 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, they would go up by 5% a year, and that would sterilize all of the new money created, so that there would be no inflation as a result of the government created money. None. And this, we've done it before. We know what is possible, and also there are examples in the Isle of Guernsey, for example. They've been doing this for 200 years. They built all of their infrastructure with money that they printed, and they have no inflation, and they have no unemployment, and believe it or not, they have no debt. And so, obviously they have proven that the system is the right one. And what we're not talking about the government creating all of the money, because I wouldn't trust politicians to do that. They might, as you say, be tempted too much, as the bankers have been. But I can see a check and balance. And what we're proposing is that the ratio of the private banks, which today is 20 to 1, in other words, as I said, they only need a nickel to create a dollar, that ratio would be changed over the 7 years so that they would need 34% cash reserve, and their ratio would be down from 20 to 1 to 2 to 1. And that would end the grand larceny once and for all. And it would be back at the level it was when the Bank of England was first chartered about 300 years ago. Mm-hmm. And that's it. What we're talking about here is a change in the balance of the power between the rich elite who are running the country and have been running the country and the world for decades, mm-hmm. and the ordinary people. In other words, reestablishing some democracy back into the system, and today there is none, because what we're doing, with this little bit of stimulation money is peanuts. And even then, people are saying it's too much. And I'm saying it's too much to borrow, because we're already in debt. We don't want to go further in debt. We want to reduce the debt. Yeah. But you can't do it when the private people have a monopoly to feed money. And today they have a monopoly. So we're saying, as in the 35 years from 1939 to 74, let's share the system. But we'll have a little bigger share, maybe, than we used to have, because we think that the private people should not have as big a share as they used to have, let alone a total monopoly, which is what they have at the present time. The monopoly system, just one, the present system is so bad that a couple of years ago, 88 families owned half the world's worth, half the wealth in the world. Then it would drop to 80, and the last estimate is 62 families now own 50% of all of the wealth in the world. And that includes the cities, the skyscrapers, the factories, everything. 50% of the wealth in the world owned by 62 families. So what we're doing, in addition to getting ourselves out of the mess we've been in, is to say This is a change in the balance of the power between the people and the rich elite, and it's long overdue.
They seem to have a monopoly on fiat currency trading, that kind of money, but the commodity that they use is also needs to be taken into consideration, and that is paper. So when it comes to the reserves that would be held in the Canadian banks, is there anything else that we could use, any other commodity that would be better than useless paper? Like, why not gold? Why could we have this backed by gold?
No, the gold system was tried and it didn't work. And I don't think we've got time tonight to explain why, but basically, if it's gold backed and you export more than you import, then gold comes into the country and you have inflation because you have gold backed money that would increase the amount of money. If the opposite was true and you were importing more than you were exporting, you have to pay for it with gold, and the gold would go out of your country, which would mean that you'd have to compress your money supply, and then you would have unemployment, another recession or depression. You can't take a single monopoly, at least a single commodity, and do that. And what we're really doing now is the only solution. It was devised by a Yale professor in the First World War, or during the Great Depression rather, and that is they take a basket of commodities. So they say they throw in the basket the cost of housing and the cost of food and the cost of transportation and the cost of education, all of these things, and add them up and say what you're supposed to do is to create enough money to produce the goods and services that you can produce in real terms without creating so much that you get inflation, nor to go in the other direction to create so little that you have this ridiculous level of unemployment that we've had for the last 9 years. That doesn't make any sense because you've got a whole generation of young people who have been eating their hearts out because they haven't the opportunity that my generation had. And they can't just go out and get a job and say we've got the world by the tail, you know.
Mm-hmm. I wonder about this concept of a truly open free market here in Canada. And do you think we actually have that, or is it more of a system of crony capitalism, or do we have a truly open free market here? And if so, I mean, I'm curious if government spending is superior to the possibility of a free market.
There's no such thing as a free market. And if you want to read a good book on that, Mr. Schultz, I think it is, the former Secretary of Labor in the United States, said how to save capitalism for the majority, not for the minority. And he goes through all of the myths of how the only people that talk about free markets are the people who have monopolies and oligopolies and who are raking in more and more money all the time and establishing political clout with it, translating it into political power, really, and in the process taking over the governance of the world. So there is no such thing as a really free market, and you have to have rules and regulations that make the system work as best you can. And we've kind of let them get out of kilter in the last long while, 40 years or more, and have to take some fresh looks at them and maybe reintroduce antitrust laws or break up some of the big oligopolies or that sort of thing. We have to take some fresh looks at what the future holds because the whole system is changing and it's all moving in the direction of both money and power being centralized more and more every year. And that's gone on long enough.
Mm-hmm. And do you think then it is possible or that we could move towards this concept of a free market? And is that where we should be moving?
Well, as I say, we're so far that you're not going to have a free market. You're just going to have a market that's maybe workable if you have rules that make it work so that the big companies can't keep on gobbling up all the little ones until there are no little ones left. You have to stop that sort of thing and maybe break up the big ones and not start over again, but at least have a little bit of competition, or technically at least, if not in reality. So no, there hasn't been a free market on just about anything for many years, and the whole idea of globalization was to make sure that every other industry would come to the point of where it could be consolidated and be an oligopoly instead of a free market. So that's the part of the strategy of the rich and powerful was to put through these trade agreements, which aren't really trade agreements. They're just agreements transferring power from the people to transnational corporations, and we should resist them with all our might. But what we need now is a change in the balance of power, and what we are presenting is the only game in town to start reversing the balance of power in the world, starting in Canada. And it should be done here because we've done it before, and we've got all of the legal framework for it. And they still got a couple of old guys like me around that could help the Minister of Finance get it through the rough spots and get it working. And as a matter of fact, there'd be nothing better that could happen to the country as a result of this broadcast tonight than 1,000 people, 1,000 people to write to the Prime Minister and say, Prime Minister, we want you to endorse this new system. We want you to use the Bank of Canada, which we own, and use it for our benefit. And we want you to adopt this system, which would right some of the wrongs of the last few years and provide a nice 7 years when we knew that money was going to flow long enough to finish projects that had been started once they're started, rather than having to cut them off halfway sometimes, which has been happening all too often in the past. And we want you to do it before the House rises, because the stakes are so great. If you pass this and got it going before the House rises for the summer, you could create an extra 50,000 jobs. And that's a lot of jobs, an extra 50,000. And over a period of 2 years, probably an extra 300,000 or 350 or 400,000 jobs over and above what's going to happen with just going along with this old, Keynesian idea, which made sense maybe in its day, but certainly is not workable today and would leave us with a lot of additional debt. And, all people have to do is get their pen and paper and write to the Right Honourable Justin Trudeau, PC MP, Prime Minister of Canada, House of Commons, Ottawa House of Commons, K1A 0A6, and they don't have to. It doesn't have to be a big long letter. It's just saying, Prime Minister, we think we want to stop borrowing money to build our country. We want to start using our bank to build the country, because that's what it was established for, and that's what it did so successfully before, and that's what we've got to do again. And so you have a unique responsibility, Prime Minister. You're in the position that nobody else probably in the whole world is, to get the ball rolling, to get things happening the way they should happening for the benefit of the 99.9% of the people, rather than the 0.1% of the people. And we'd like you to do it. We'd like you to do it now, because every month you put off means that there will be fewer projects started, fewer jobs created, and more people just eating their hearts out looking for something to do. And then to write another letter to the Honourable Bill Morneau, PC MP, care of the House of Commons, same address, K1A 0A6, and say, Mr. Finance Minister, you should take a leaf from your elders. You should look back at the history of Canada and understand what happened before, from 1939 to 74, which worked so well, and do something like it. And there's a plan on the table, so you don't have to think about it. All you have to do is start doing it, and right away, And we know that Mr. Hellyer is available if you need some help to get the legislation drafted and put through Parliament quickly, so that everything would be set to roll in a very short period of time. So let's get at it, because we're going to hold you accountable if you stick to your present system and you create less jobs than you could by huge numbers, huge numbers. And if you run us into debt when you don't need to, because we own the patent, the people own the patent. Legally, the Parliament of Canada has absolute control and authority over money and banking in Canada, and they can do anything they want. And the banks have no rights whatsoever. They have privileges that were given to them by Parliament. And Parliament can change the ratio, which is what we're recommending. Parliament can say that they have to have cash reserves of 34% instead of 0. And Parliament can do the things that will make the system tenable, which will make it stable. You'll never have any more recessions and depressions, and which will make it democratic to the point where the banks have enough to carry on and finance small business and that sort of thing, and governments have enough to carry on and meet the needs of the people without running deficits. And that would be, that's the ideal, and it's achievable.
Well, I certainly think you're definitely on to something. Just so long as it's not going to be forced upon the population by Justin, as long as we're not forced into this, if this is a voluntary exchange, then it makes sense to me. So what are... Yeah.
Nobody's forcing anybody, except the people should force the government to serve their needs, because we have so much at stake. Our healthcare is at stake. Our ability to deal with these terrible problems in the First Nations are at stake, because every day there are more problems, and there still is not enough money to meet it. And you see a little bit coming each year, but they need a lot of money, and they need it right away. And the same thing with infrastructure. And if you wait a year or two to start building transportation, then you just lose a year or two and nothing to gain for it. And that's what democracy is all about. And I think it was President Obama who made a speech to the students in Tel Aviv when he was over there a few years ago. And he said, governments are rigid. They'll sit on their you-know-what, and they will not act until the people force them to act. The only thing we have is numbers. We haven't got the power of the banks. We haven't got the power of the transnational corporations. We haven't got any of those things for us to influence governments the way that the rich elite are doing. But we have got, theoretically at least, the numbers. And if we send 1,000 letters to the Prime Minister tonight, and another 1,000 and a few nights more, and it keeps up, eventually something will happen, and it will be the best thing that's happened to this country in the last 42 years.
I do absolutely agree. We do have the numbers. I've always pictured this as a pyramidal structure with the banking elite at the very top and all of us people at the bottom who make up the system and prop them up and are able to hold it up. But to me, it's all about removing yourself from that system. Global non-compliance to me is where it's at. The analogy of removing the bottom brick out of the pyramid, well, what's going to happen? The whole thing is going to come crashing down. So I
would like to clear up that point. The way we're doing this over 7 years, so that the banking system can make the transition over that period of time. It's deliberately done, and nobody else has a plan that is taking that into account. So they change a little bit every year for 7 years, and they can accommodate it, and they don't crash. On the contrary, they can crash without something like this, and they might in fact really do that and hurt a lot of people. But the only way to stop them and to give them a smooth transition, and not enough money in the future to finance all of the games that they play, the hedge funds, and that they and there are derivatives that are now hanging over our heads to such an extent. So we're letting them down gently rather than with a crash, and we're letting ourselves up gently so that we're not doing it either too slowly nor too fast. And the 7 years will allow us to start great projects like we used to build in the 50s and 60s, and to finish them, and then to have enough money to carry on with the kinds of maintenance and so on that we should have been doing for the last 42 years when we didn't have the money. That's the reason we didn't do it then. So no, it's all of these things have been thought through very, very carefully, and there are a dozen different proposals on the table worldwide. And in my opinion, and I've been looking at this problem for 68 years now, we've got the best one, and Canada really has the responsibility to lead the way and to make it work, to show to the world that it works, and then the rest of the world can adopt it and do something about that 250 million unemployed people that there are in the world, including in some countries, young people near 30% unemployment, 25% unemployment, just absolutely horrendous. You know, it is immoral. The system today is immoral to the nth degree. And what we're proposing is going to put a little morality as well as a little more common sense back into the system. So I hope that the people will take the trouble to write to the Prime Minister and to the Finance Minister, and also to their own MP if they've got the time and energy to do it, and say, don't rush off for your summer holidays until you face this issue, because we don't want you to build up any more debt for us, and we want you to spend more money rather than less to create jobs and to start doing the things that are so obvious that need doing.
Well, I would love to see Canada leading the way in this effort. I mean, it's been nice to see the Icelandic prime minister jailing, 29 bankers, and it would be good if Canada could lead the way in that charge. So, what is next then for the Canadian bank reformers? Where are you guys taking this from here? What are the next steps?
Well, we're putting up a website, and we're going to use the social media. We're going to take any opportunities for radio broadcasts and so on that we can get to spread the word. One of our people is going to have a caravan going across the country in the summer. I hope that we'll have the situation under control by then, but if not, he will carry on the message with a busload of people that he plans to do. At least that's his plan. And we're going to do everything possible to inform people what the system's all about. Because Henry Ford said if the people understood the banking system, there would be a revolution before morning. Well, I think he's exaggerating a little bit, but if people understand it, then what they will do is what we're asking them to do, say to your government, your MP, and the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance, this is what we expect you to do, this is what we want you to do, and don't come crying back to us looking for votes next time around if you don't do it.
Yeah, well, I'd have to agree with you there. I'm fully in favor of that one. Again, thanks for joining us. We'll have the links in the description to where people can get involved if they want to get involved with what you're doing. Any final thoughts for the viewers here watching? Any advice that you might have for Canadians who are watching now and want to somehow help this movement?
Well, I think my advice, and it's profound in the sense, I think this is the best opportunity that we people have had yet to do something constructive in changing the balance of power between the rich and the poor. And if we muff it, if we don't do it, we'll deserve what we get. But if we take the ball in our hands and score and show what is possible, then we will have done the world a tremendous service. And the implications are just absolutely phenomenal, because we talk about global warming, which is really the most important problem in the world. Without this kind of banking reform, there'll be no money for it. Countries have no money to finance the very fast turnover that we should have between fossil fuels and new energies like zero-point energy. We have the technology, but we haven't got the money. So the whole future of the world, in a sense, is up for grabs at this moment, because we have to get the money first and then start working on global warming and solving all of the other problems that are so important to the future of our planet, and incidentally to the survival of our species, because it is not guaranteed. And we have to do something about it, starting with each one of us as individuals.
Yeah, well, taking the power of the issuance of money out of the private banks and back into the hands of the Canadians seems like a good way to go about doing that. So once again, I want to thank you very much for joining us today, and you keep up the great work, and take care.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. And one final plea to the people is, don't miss the opportunity, because opportunities like this only come, in this case, once in a century.
Very true.
And this is it. And if we blow it, well, we'll suffer the consequences. If we really put our hearts and minds to it, I think it will work.
Agreed. The time is now. I mean, we're at that fork in the road. It's really now or never. So again, thank you so much, and good luck with the project.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right, guys, that was Mr. Paul Hellyer, former Minister of National Defense, with some intriguing concepts there. I'm still kind of taking in this plan, this idea, and the concept of shifting the balance from the power of issuing money from the banks and putting it into the hands of the government. It's interesting. I got to be honest, guys. I don't have a whole heck of a lot of trust in the government at this stage in the game. I think we need to do away with fiat currency in general, and just printing money out of nothing, and perhaps have it backed by some sort of actual real commodity. But again, it's good that people are taking on the banks to this extent right now. You know, what Comer was doing is getting people active, and at least people are aware that something needs to change. So hopefully next time I go out onto the street and do some streeter interviews, maybe people will start to learn where money actually comes from, how it's actually created, and how the centralized banks can rule and control our lives by maintaining the power to issue that currency. So that's really what it all comes down to, folks. And on that note, I will pretty much call it a show. We're going to cut to a quick commercial break from some sponsors, some friends of ours here at Press for Truth. So we'll just quickly go to that. This is a video from our friends from the Canna Growers, and we'll be back just to close out the show right after this clip.
British Columbia, home to the most beautiful landscapes in the world. Home to mom and pop vineyards, hot springs, farmers markets, some of the world's best skiing, snowboarding, surfing, and mountain biking. We protect our rainforests and keep our air clean. In BC, we strike the right balance between nature and nurture. But did you know that for the last 30 years, BC has also been home to the finest cannabis in the world? BC Bud is world-renowned for its taste, aroma, and potency. We've competed and won cups, gained recognition from international celebrities. We are the Cannabis Growers of Canada. We create wealth, opportunity, and good-paying private sector jobs. The BC cannabis crop is worth over $7 billion a year, and there were over 17,000 farms creating work for Canadians and improving the lives of millions of people. We are joining together to build a free and fair cannabis market that benefits all Canadians. Won't you come and join us at cannagrowers.ca?
CanadaGrowers.ca is the site, guys. Check it out. It's one of our new sponsors here at PFT. They help make this show possible, as well as our good friends at Skunk Beard Extracts, producing some of Canada's finest medical grade extracts going out to patients all across Canada. So huge shout out to our sponsors who are helping us produce these shows, and you can actually get involved and help us as well if you go to patreon.com/pressfortruth. Even just $1 or $2 a month helps us to continue to produce thought-provoking videos and produce live shows like the one you're watching right now. So please check the links in the description for all that. And other than that, that's it. I'll call it a show for this week, folks. I want to thank you once again for tuning in. I hope to see you back right here, same time, same channel next week. Until then, keep fighting the good fight, my friends.